Hi guys. Put together a presentation that I guess is sort of a evolutionary process from when I was teaching. This was, I guess, the origins was a presentation for my students. Um, so I've added some things to it as things have evolved a little bit, and I just wanted to share it with you right now. If I could keep the cat off the desk, it'd be fine. Um, so I want to do that. So just let me flip over to the share screen here and get you guys on the screen. Okay. Um, so really, this presentation is about, obviously it's kayak fishing, and specifically we're talking about inshore waters of Maryland and eastern shore of Virginia. My email is right there, so if you have any questions or anything or like to get a hold of me, certainly feel free to do that. We also are on Facebook, Current Break Kayak Fishing, and everyone, it's an open forum. Everyone's welcome to join, post their pictures or questions, or just celebrate the wonderful experience of kayak fishing. Especially here in Maryland and Virginia, we have an abundance of opportunity to catch lots of different species. So it's something I really enjoy. So really the topic of this is the Eastern Chesapeake. When we mean Eastern, I'm talking specifically about the eastern shore of Maryland and Virginia. The Delmarva Peninsula, at least the Chesapeake side of it, where there just seems to be endless opportunity for fish and kayaking in general. So really the subtitle of this is kayaking title inshore tactics, locations, and essential sources. So it's kind of a brief tutorial on finding fish, where to go, because it shouldn't be a secret. There's plenty of opportunity and plenty of fish for everyone out there. So we're going to go through this step by step. And like I said, by no means is this a an end all be all. The opportunities are endless. The tackle choices are seemingly endless at times. But this is an opportunity to answer some questions, or maybe spur some conversation regarding how to do this and have really a good day on the water, because really that's what it's all about. This is just a small part of a larger presentation. So if anyone would like this presented to a group or anything like that, that would certainly be something we could talk about if that would be of interest to your members. Not for the purpose of being boastful, for sure. But what we're going to be talking about today is tournament proven. So all the things that we're going to be talking about, it's not theory. It's not, I caught a couple fish one day and, I got a video camera and now I'm going to make videos. This is about real information, real places. And the proof is really in some tournament success that we've had in the last 4 to 5 years or so. So with that being said, let's move on to our first, and we'll move that out of the way for you. Move that down to our first category, because before you go fishing, any kind of fishing, especially kayak fishing, especially inshore kayak fishing, you need to do your homework. You just can't drop the kayak in the water and go out there and expect to catch a lot of fish. You might, but chances are, if you do some homework, you can have a much more enjoyable day. We start this out with talking about a real simple quote. Now, I don't know where it came from. It's sort of, I got it through my familiarity with Salt Strong, and this is a group in Florida. is that 90% of the fish are found in 10% of the water. And I really believe that to be true. And I think if that sort of is your overriding focus as you plan your trips and gain additional knowledge, I think that it may even be more than that, maybe 5% of the water, because they really are very concentrated in certain areas under certain conditions and circumstances. So the four sources that I use here, I go from the top to the bottom, is Pro Wind Finder. That's probably the preeminent app for wind. It is very, very, very reliable. It's not 100%. I've had a couple instances when it was not. But for the most part, it's 99.8%. It's really very good. And it's an easy download on your phone. Keep it on your phone and use it often. The second one is Navionics. Navionics is also an app that you can download that you can use on your laptop or desktop as well. And this is essentially online charts showing depth ranges and things like this. And we'll get into that in a little bit. The lower left is basically Tide. Tide is an app on your phone that gives you outstanding tide information, very easy to use, and is absolutely critical for really any kind of fishing. The bottom right is, of course, Google Earth. Everybody knows Google Earth because Google Earth gives us images of the places that we want to fish. And when you combine the use of Google Earth and Navionics in particular, scouting out locations, they work hand in hand, because one will tell you some information and the other will tell you some information, and that information is not always the same. But if you put those informations together, they will bring a clearer picture, and we'll talk about that. I mentioned planning. Pre-trip planning is critical. It makes for a pretty day on the water or a great day of catching fish. So when I'm looking at a place to fish, I'm breaking it down really a couple different ways. As I said, I'm using Google Earth. What you see, the image on the left is Google Earth. The image on the right is the same location. In this case, this is a Navionic view on the right of Asquith Island. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with Asquith Island, that is across from the Hooper Straits. It is Honga River area. Very, very good place to fish, very productive. A lot of our inshore charter captains fish this area quite regularly. So this is the same image of both. So let me do something here and show you with the pointer here how we break this down. All right, so if I go to Google Earth, this is the image I get. So what do I see? What gets me excited or not excited about this particular location? Well, if I'm looking at the location, I see here, these dark areas right in here are grass. Okay, well, obviously grass is good for fishing, particularly speckled trout in the springtime and the fall. So that immediately gets my attention as a possible target area. Also down here, I see the same thing. I see a pretty big grass flat, but I also see a very thin peninsula right here. And this thin peninsula is going to have water going over it, whether the tide's coming in or the tide's going out. This is going to be a place where there's going to be, tidal flow. And of course, we know tidal flows is very important. So this whole area here really is quite interesting and will be a place that I would target. These arrows here indicate points. These points are places where there are depth changes, and fish are attracted to these places because these are ambush opportunities. So I would focus on those as well. Out here, this is a flat point. It's hard to see, but you can see it here on the other map a little bit better. This is a flat point. In other words, there's a ledge there. And what that tells me is that that might be deep water. There might be a mud bank there that on a low tide, the water is going to go out to maybe 1.5 feet, 2 feet, 2.5 feet. But when that tide is in, it's going to be 3.5, 4, 4.5, maybe even 5 feet. That's where fish are going to be. So that's a very interesting place as well that I would want to check out. Now up here, of course, what do we see here? We see more points, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. These very irregular shorelines are generally very productive. You can quite literally fish point to point and catch fish, and we'll talk about that in a little bit too. Again, up here, what do we see? Another dark patch. That's going to be grass as well. All right, so flipping over to the other map, move this over here. We don't see many of those features. It's much more general. But with this, the Navionics map, we see depth changes. So let's say I go over here and I strike out. I'm wrong about everything, which happens, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save the day. So let me go find some transitions. Let me go find some deep water. So what I might want to do is go out here where we see these transition lines come together and narrow up. So I'm going to come out to these areas here. In this case, we have the channel here to the left, and of course, we have the shallow here to the right. We also have the same situation here at the bottom, which was over here. Now, this really excites me much more than this because of that point that extends down. Fish that will be found in shallow water will often, for lack of a better way to explain it, leave themselves an escape route. They want to feel some degree of safety, and they'll come into the shallows if they feel that they can move to safer water, which to them is deeper water. I don't even know what that is. Okay, whatever that is. So when you have basically a 30 foot plus channel and a very short transition to 2, 3, 4, 5 feet of water on these points, it can be a really good, it can be a really hot spot. It can be really, really good there because if the fish get uncomfortable or the tide is moving, of course, and the tide's dropping out, and they're going to move to deeper water. So that's a good place as well. So basically, you have to use both to get an idea of the complete picture. And of course, you don't know really what the complete picture is until you really get out there. All right, so this is one section of the Maryland part of the Eastern Shore. This is predominantly Dorchester County. And Dorchester County has an abundance of launch sites. And you can see all of these, the pins, the yellow pins are launch sites. The yellow circles are a 2-mile circumference. So pretty much what I find that if I can identify a 2-mile circumference from a launch point, I can target fish very successfully in there, and I can really get a very long day out of just, maybe a 10 or 12, 14 mile trip in that 2-mile circumference by the time you hit all the creeks and points and things like that. So generally that works out pretty good. So that's kind of what I figure. The red, of course, is our tide stations. So before you go to any of these locations, make sure you check tides. The tide app that I showed you has all these tide stations. So you find the nearest tide station to where you want to launch from, and it's very accurate, very accurate. The one place I did want to talk about here is some place that you may be familiar with. and that is Janes Island. Janes Island State Park is really one of the places I first started to get serious about inshore kayak fishing. There's a state park, it's a beautiful park. So if you like to camp and kayak, it's a perfect place. Even if you don't like to fish, it's the state park is quite literally Janes Island, so you can kayak all around and enjoy the day. There's a nice beach and all of those. But Janes Island provides lots of opportunity to fish, both on the north and the south end. So Janes Island is located right here. It is just above Crisfield. So Crisfield here is Summers Cove Boat Ramp. And there is a boat ramp, a launch ramp at the park as well. So you don't have to go into Crisfield. There's a ramp there. And I've launched many times from each location. So let's look at Janes Island a little bit more. Janes Island here that you see on the right, all right, is the Navionics version with a map overlay of the Earth. So it's a little bit of Navionics. It's a little bit of Google Earth. So that does present some different aspects sometimes. All right. So what you're looking at here is what you're looking at here. All right. Now this can be a productive area all up in here, but I fish this far less. And really, only thing I've really found there any consistently are small to medium sized rockfish. So a beautiful area, absolutely stunningly beautiful. But to be real productive here is the southern end. The southern, I would say, from here, this area here, is really quite good. It's quite good, especially, of course, when the water cools in the spring and then, of course, in the fall. All right, I have a video of, and it's real brief, it's like a minute and a half of Janes Island to let you get a perspective of it, in case you have never been there. So let me turn this off. Boom. Hang on a second. We'll turn that off. And let's take a look at this video, and I'll talk over it a little bit and show you what it looks like. All right, what you're looking at here is Janes Island. This is the northern view. This is that rounded area to the north. What you're looking at there, quite literally, that marsh area, that is Janes Island. That is a state park in Maryland. So you can see it's beautiful. What you're looking at there in the background is Tangier Sound. There to that left, a large body of water, that canal coming through from the left is what they call the main channel. That actually comes right from the state park, and you can paddle out there, and there's nature trails, and there's all sorts of things. Now, if we pause it here, if I'll pause. All right, we pause it here. Now, this is the southerly view. Now, what you see down here, okay, is Crisfield, the Crisfield area. So, and down here is, of course, the southern end of Janes Island. There's fish to be caught all through here. This channel is quite deep. Caught rockfish, white perch, hardhead, variety of fish in here. But like I said, the majority of the really quality fishing, I think, at Janes Island is on the southern end. So as we continue to swing around to the left here, we see Janes Island State Park. So what you see here is the park, the campground, and the marina. All right, so let's get out of that and get back to where we were. All right, so this is what we're looking at. And so, like I said, there's wonderful campground, very clean, very well maintained. So if that is something that you would like to do and take advantage of, you certainly can do that. All right, so let's talk about the southern end of Janes Island. Southern end of Janes Island is a playground for kayak fishermen. So what we see down here in the insert is the southern end as opposed to the northern end. So this is what we're looking at, this area. All right. So if you were to come here for the first time and you're looking at this on Google Earth and you want to break down this area, there's a tremendous amount of information here. So what I've done is I created an overlay on this to give you some of the spots that get your attention and some other spots that probably wouldn't because you haven't fished it. All right. Hang on one second. All right, why are we not going? I don't know why we're not going. All right, there we go. I'm sorry. So this overlay of what I've added here is based on what you observe and of course on experience. And let me just go left to right here. This is Tangier Sound out here. All right, this is Tangier Sound. Let me get back to a second. Get back to the laser pointer because that's going to be easier for you to see. All right, so this is a very productive point. Now, what you can't see on here is that there are rocks, very large boulders that was once riprap that the tide over years has sort of dispersed on the bottom. Can be a very productive area. There's also broken down and riprap here that is can be productive, but also can be very dangerous because on the wrong tide, it's slightly under the water surface. So if you're sort of rolling up here and just, think you're going to fish this point, you could very easily damage your kayak or have an issue on this submerged riprap. But there's more riprap here that can be productive. And to be honest, I've never caught any fish on this riprap. I have caught fish on this one though. So can be good. This is a much better location. Of course, this is riprap from here out to here, and is a very popular place with the boaters, where they'll come in and they'll come in here and they'll cast in here and do quite well. It's also very good for kayaking, obviously. Up here in Old House Cove, you can't see it, and you can sort of see it here, but there are lots of depth variations here. All right, these depth variations are places where fish will sit, especially in the springtime. A tremendous amount of success here in the springtime. Not huge fish, but there's a lot of them. So again, these are something you have to do over just accumulating experience. Here, we obviously have darker areas. This is a grass bed here, grass flat. This is an extension of that grass flat that is sort of separated by these areas of this sandbar right here. Up in here, this generally is very shallow, but if you stay in here close to this side, there's plenty of water. You can get back in there. And then there are a series of holes up in here, very good point. Lots of current, grass out in here. And as you enter this, there's also current coming in and out of there and holes. So as you can see, there's a lot going on here. There's always something to fish. There's always somewhere to go, something different to look at. And the conditions are always changing. Problem with fishing here a lot is it's very susceptible to a southerly wind or southwest wind in particular. So when that southwest wind comes up over the bay, it's blowing, 20 plus, it can be a challenge in certain places, but it also gives you protection in certain places. So Very interesting area. All right, so let's look at another area here. This is actually in Virginia. This is Guilford Creek in Virginia. Now, what you're looking at on the left is, again, the Navionics view taken from the laptop, from the app. So this is what I'm looking at, all right? I'm seeing this and this and this. Well, it looks pretty good. I'm seeing sharp points, shallow water, some deeper water nearby. So this looks like a place you want to explore. So what I did is I went down there and I launched from about this point here. And I basically just came out and I just started making a series of right-hand turns, right? Boom, I came all the way up into here, which is within my 2-mile circle, which is, right at the edge of that. So I never left that 2-mile circle. And each one of these waypoints that I set, right, represents at least one fish caught. So it could have been one fish or multiple fish at each one of those locations. And I think there's 26 or 28 of those waypoints on there. So you're talking about a day that you caught 30 plus fish. And you covered a lot of water. And we'll tell you, most of these fish were on the points. Fish point to point, preferably on a rising tide, because that's when you're going to find at least 4 feet of water. If you're over 5, it's too much. All right. If it's just too much water, they're going to be pushed up in the shore because they're going to be pushing for bait. So if you can find 2.5 to 4 feet of water, and you can find bait, and you can find a point, you're going to find a fish. This area down here in particular is very interesting because there's a lot going on here in this little creek. Obviously, there's the same images of the creek. Now, from initially fishing it on this day, I've gone back to this creek on 3 different occasions to verify the pattern. And the pattern is there's fish in there and they hold in there. Whether it's in the fall or it was a week and a half ago when I was there, when the water temperature was like 46, 47 degrees. These are resident fish. I don't think these are really migratory fish. They're not huge fish. They are 18 to 24, 25 inches. But they're good fish. It's shallow water. And again, tide is critical, especially back up in these creeks. All right, so this is that creek. All right, again, this is a Navionics view. This area right here on that creek where this separates, okay, is really, really good. All right, now this location here is the hot spot in the whole creek. Now, you can also fish here, and off of the picture, there's another location up there, because we have little feeder creeks. We have deep water next to shallow water. We have a really good tide. And one trick to the trade here is, if you're really curious about the depth of the water back in these creeks, follow the crab pots, okay? Because crabbers aren't putting crab pots in 2 feet of water. Sorry. So if they've got a high tide and they've got 4 to 5 feet of water, they're going to throw crab pots down there. So if you see crab pots, on a high tide, you've got 4 to 5 feet of water, maybe more. Right. So follow the crab pots. Crab pots came down here. They turned into the cove here and run all the way back up into here. So I knew there was some water there. Here, there is a steep mud bank. All right. This, on a high tide, is the money spot, because you have 4 feet of water on a high tide. And when the tide drops out, you've got about 2 feet. Well, where do those fish go when that tide drops out? Well, they go right here. They go right in that line where those crab pots are. That denotes that deeper water. So if you're there on a low tide, I'm fishing out here. If I'm fishing on a high tide, I'm more tight up in here and more tight up in here. This is really a nice little spot. All right, so what do you use? Well, it's the same thing we use for most of us use. All right. So soft plastics, they're obviously the most popular and most versatile. Um, you can cast them, troll them, jig them. I do it all that with them. There's lots of colors and varieties and types of plastic to use. Matched with a really good jig head, like a quality jig head. Don't cheap out on the jig head because I believe in a good, strong jig head. Um, and we're not going to talk about jig heads, but we can do that if at a later time, I guess. All right, but some of my favorites here. This is my number one go-to, and this is something I've talked about before online. This is Blue Pearl Glimmer. This is a Z-Man Diesel Minnow. This bait is absolute money. I've caught lots of fish on lots of other Z-Mans, but this is the number one as far as being consistent. The second here is this is a saltwater assassin. This is a 5-inch. Now you can get this in a 3.5 or a 5. And this is a salt pepper silver with a chartreuse tail. Speckled trout love this bait. Love this bait. You can also use sort of this slim shady color is a good color, or something with a flash. Now, all plastics don't have to have a paddle tail, so these are sort of more segmented tails where you have to give the bait some action, and these are really good when you find fish in a like holding in that hole, right, on that low tide. You throw it out there and you can give it some erratic action and get a lot of reaction strikes out of it. So everybody has their own soft plastics and their favorites. These are just ones that I've had, and these can be used with a jig head or weighted hooks, like worm hooks, like bass fishermen, right? And those I'm beginning to use more and more. For the Z-Mans, I would recommend Texas Eye jig head, the chin lock jig head, completely weedless. It's a great jig head. Okay. All right. So continuing, crankbaits are a little bit more problematic in the fact that it's very difficult to find one that runs above 4 feet. But I use them more as jerk baits rather than just wobbling them through the water. Real erratic motion, real fast, real slow, jerk it. And again, you're trying to elicit a reaction strike. They will suspend or float. And twitch baits come in this category as well. I don't have any twitch baits in this photograph, but they will do the same thing as well. The one I really like, the one that was killer for me this year, was this one, and this is a Yozuri. This is a 4-inch. Obviously, it's green over silver, and it runs really shallow. It runs about 3 feet, and it is a little bit smaller than an X-Rap 10, a little bit lighter. So it has a little bit more of a crazy reaction when you twitch it or jerk it real hard. And boy, I crushed fish on this thing this year. I mean, you can see it's sort of beat up. So that's been a really good bait. All right. Of course, everybody throws top water. That's a real personal thing, I think. These are just some of the ones that I keep in my box, of course, and they're either popping baits or walking baits. And both can be effective early morning, evening, even sometimes during the day if you find in the right circumstance. So again, spooks, spook juniors, whatever you prefer. I think when fish are going to hit a top water, I think they're going to hit a lot of different varieties. So, whatever your favorite is. Now, this is one you probably or may not be familiar with. These are wake baits. Now, you look at this bait, you think largemouth bass, but these are actually extraordinarily effective for rockfish, and trout and redfish. These float, they run right on the top. and this is why they're called a wake bait. If you look at the bill on this bait, see this one here is actually a true wake bait. That bill, rather than being pointed out, is pointed more straight down. So when that bait comes, when you're cranking it back, it stays on the surface. If you keep the rod tip up, it'll stay on the surface. So you just crank it back, and that thing will walk the dog by itself without you giving it any motion. You don't have to learn that skill of walking the dog. All right, it will do that for you. Okay, very, very effective bait. The one here, this is the same bait, except we see the bill is now come out a little bit more. This will drop this bait down to about a foot, maybe 2 feet. Okay, if you want it up in the water column, both of them. If you want it up in the water column, hold the rod tip up. You want it down lower, drop the rod tip. The bait will run appropriately. These are excellent in very shallow water. I love these. Love these. The two at the top, these are 6 cents. They're not cheap by most standards. I mean, they're probably $12, $13 each. But I would definitely explore these. Okay, this one is a true wake bait. This is what 6 cents calls their 80X. Essentially a wake bait that's going to drop about 2 feet in the column. This has also been a very good bait. This is a wake bait, but this is a Yozuri wake bait, and I caught pretty good summer, pretty good days with that one as well. They're heavy baits. They're dense. They're not real long. They fly through the air. You can cast them a mile, especially in a bait caster, so you can cover a lot of water. So if you're fan casting an area, they're great. All right, so let's look at a little bit of the areas. Go to left, right again. Again, this is actually in Kent Narrows. This is Prospect Bay, just south of Kent Narrows, where we caught a lot of really nice fish. And shows a nice grassy shoreline. Now, like I said, on high tide, the shoreline is about 4.5 feet. On low tide, it's about 2 feet. So on a high tide, you want to spend some time there. You want to check it out. On a low tide, I'd probably go by it and go across and maybe check out another place. But a very, very productive place, very beautiful. This location is on the big Anamessex River. This is just above Crisfield. And this is a very productive area for rockfish and for speckled trout. Again, this is a really, really nice high tide. This is, yeah, you want to be all over this. This looks really good. All right, so let's get down to, I mentioned something a little bit ago about mud bank. All right, this is a mud bank. In other words, this is a really super low tide. Now, when that super low tide is out, basically what you do is you have a cliff of mud here. I mean, it's vertical. It is straight down. And it's about 2, some places maybe 3 feet. And then the water down here is about 1.5 feet, 2 feet. So when that tide comes in, all right, it's going to fill that wall with water and bring it up to the level of this. All right, this is the low tide. This is the high tide. All right, when you see this, go fish somewhere else. All right, unless you're going to go way up in the grass and maybe go hunting, redfish or something like that. If you're in that type of location, but if you're just generally out there fishing and looking for rockfish or trout or whatever, this is not a tide that you want to be fishing in this particular location. Like I said, if you're going to go up in the grass, really skinny water and look for redfish, that's a whole different story, a whole different matter. But this is the low tide. This is the high tide. This is from a trip about 2 weeks ago. And when I took this, I had a great high tide, and I just crushed fish all along here in 4 feet of water. Now, 2 to 3 weeks before that, when a high tide like this, I was only catching fish in 2.5 to 3 feet of water. Now, the water temperature dropped considerably, and during that 2, 3, 4 week period. And in this case, I didn't find them in 2.5 to 3 feet of water. I found them in 4 to 5 feet of water. But that 4 to 5 feet of water, again, was right on this bank. Now, did that change in water temperature change that? I really don't know. I don't know. But once you get in that pattern, you feel comfortable with it. And if I'm fishing 3 and I'm not catching nothing, what am I doing? I'm going to go find the next. I'm going to go find the next temperature, the next depth range, and I'm going to do that. And that's exactly what happened in this situation. So I'm going to hug that bank at 3, 3.5. I don't like it. I'm going to move out. I'm going to go 3.5 to 5, and that's where I found it. So, the shallow tactics are varied. When we're trolling up and down these on a kayak, you can do quite well. I don't necessarily troll anymore to catch fish. I sort of troll to find fish, because a lot of times, especially the larger rockfish, they will not bite the bait. They'll bump it. So I use a pretty light rod and a pretty light bait, weedless, and I just drag that bait in my depth range, my target depth range, and I wait to feel a bump. And if I feel a bump, all right, I give him a little bit longer to see if he might take a bite. Chances are he's not, if he only bumped it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back around and I'm going to start fan casting that area. And more times than not, he'll come back and take it once he sees it again. Especially the bigger fish. Smaller fish, they'll just come up and bite. Bigger fish, they got to be bigger fish for a reason, because they're smart. So they're going to come up and bump it, get a sniff, get a feel for it. And that's why maybe something like a Procure or some something along those lines can be a benefit, because if they're going to come up and bump it, they're going to smell it and they're going to get a little bit of a taste, and they may come back on it. So I would recommend that well. So what are we going to troll? We're going to troll shorelines, grass lines. We're going to troll massive grass flats, as long as the grass and the tide permits. And again, locate fish. When we locate the fish, then we go from a macro situation to a micro situation, right? We're looking big picture on the hunt to location and really targeting specifically. These mud banks, again, refers to what we see down here, and stump fields. Stump fields are hidden stumps under the water that can be a hazard if you're kayak fishing, but can also hold fish. Fan casting shorelines, grass flat structures. Again, that's the targeting. And again, targeting structure. These points are structure. Docks are structure. Riprap are structure. And even sight fishing. Because if you get in some of these areas on the eastern shore, the water is very, very clear. You can actually sight fish in some situations. All right, so this is the area that we looked at earlier. So again, looking at this, and this is where my trip was, and made all these waypoints here. This is a really good representation of fishing point to point. This was a very, very productive area. And of course, what's very good is we have a tide station very nearby, so we're going to get a very, very accurate tide reading. And here we go. This is what we're looking at. This is that trip again. So we did very well, and we've been back to this a couple of times and have done equally as well. So it was not a sort of a one-shot deal. It wasn't they were here yesterday and they're not here today. So I feel very confident that if we were down there right now, even if it's 30 degrees outside, I'm sure we could definitely catch some fish. A couple case studies here to give you an idea of what we're talking about. This particular fish is my personal best speckled trout. This is 28 inches. This was caught at James Island, down on the southern end of James Island. So this was caught about 2 springs ago on a very, very good day of fishing. It was caught on a popping cork, which is something I haven't talked about. You see here the popping cork with a lime truce paddle tail underneath and an 1/8 ounce jig head was the ticket that day. So beautiful fish returned, and so she can make little fishes. All right, so the case study is it was basically mid-May. We had short grass. I'm popping that popping cork over short grass. The time is mid-morning, so it wasn't terribly early because it was just the fish were on that grass and they weren't leaving and they were chewing, so it was really good. Water temp was probably in the low to mid 70s. I'm kind of going off of the memory of that and history. The tide was high. There was definitely, 4.5 feet of water there. The location, of course, was James Island. The weather was absolutely, it was still and clear and calm. It was beautiful. And we were fishing in a grass flat, and the technique was a popping cork, and the bait was 3.5 inch paddle tail. So again, it's consistent with everything we talked about. All right, the second one is a redfish, and this was caught this summer. Now, unfortunately, I'm not the greatest redfish fisherman in the world. That's something we're going to be working on this summer for sure, and really targeting redfish more specifically. But this was a really nice fish that I caught while fishing the Tangier Classic. It was probably the best fish I caught in the whole tournament. So when was this? This was late summer, and the Tangier Classic is fished the same time every year. This was very early in the morning. It was only out this is probably about 7. Sun was just up. Water temp was mid-70s. The tide was high. We were coming out of a ramp in Harborton, Virginia, which is a beautiful ramp. The weather was breezy. It was breezy. It was somewhere between breezy and a wind. And then the next day it blew up pretty good with tall, thin clouds. Really a pretty day. A little tough on the kayak if you didn't have a good location. Didn't catch this one on popping cork. Caught this one trolling. I was trolling an island, a small island at the end of a much larger series of small islands. Casting across the point into deeper water. And this fish did the same thing in regard to the bump. I originally felt him because he didn't bite it. He bumped it and then started fan casting that entire point and caught him. Now, 3 hours before that, all right, on that same point, I pulled 7 fish off of that same point. On that rising tide. One of them was an additional redfish, and then it was 6 or 7 rockfish. But when I came back the second time, he was the only one remaining. So I guess they had scattered at that point. All right, case study number 3 is a rockfish. And this was caught in early June as part of the Kent Narrows tournament. All right. This was caught in early morning. Water temp was low to mid 70s. The tide was a beautiful high tide. I was right on a point, and I targeted this point. I planned this point. This was not. Hang on a second. This was not by accident. This was a targeted place on a targeted tide at a targeted time. And this was a 27.5-inch rockfish that I pulled off a point in about 4 feet of water, about 10 feet off the bank, and won the tournament. So that was really, really gratifying. The location, again, it's Prospect Bay, which is in that area south of Kent Narrows. It was a beautiful morning, clear light breeze, and it was a point. And I caught this fish, believe it or not. He didn't bump it. He just swallowed it. because I was getting a little frustrated with what I was using, and I said, well, I gotta change things up here. I gotta go a different route because I'm getting ready to lose this tide. So I took off what I had on, and I put on a 4-inch dart spin. And a dart spin is a bait that I haven't shown you that has a willow blade on the back rather than a paddle on the back. They're made in Florida by a company, and I go to them whenever I need a change up. And I'll tell you, that bait wasn't in the water 30 seconds, and he just engulfed it. So sort of saved my day and made the tournament worthwhile. All right, so I hope that answers some questions, give you some things to talk about. If you have any questions, current break kayak fishing, the Facebook page, you can certainly message me on there, or you can even text me, or of course, email me if you choose. Like I said, if anybody wants to, we can extend this out even more detailed. Bring the kayak, show the setup and just how things work. And if you would like to be interested in something like that, I'd certainly be we're very willing and happy to do it. Okay. All right. So I guess that's it. So we'll leave it at that. So thank you guys.